Welcome to the third and final episode in a Legendarium series about the life of Elizabeth Bathory. In Part 3, Villain or Victim, we will talk about the sensational trial which brought Elizabeth Bathory to justice, or as some say, injustice. In her obsessive need for more victims to murder, Countess Elizabeth Bathory of Hungary ignored the fact that aristocratic families had the means to seek justice that peasant families did not. When they came looking for their daughters who disappeared at the Countess's finishing school, Elizabeth Bathory made up bizarre excuses to cover up their disappearances. She even claimed that one went insane and murdered a half-dozen other girls before committing suicide. Some of the enraged parents went to King Matthias II of Hungary, who launched an investigation. For years, Elizabeth's dead husband, Ferenc Nadasdy, lent money to the Hungarian crown, and the king made no effort to repay that debt. Elizabeth, as Ferenc's widow, made herself extremely unpopular with her frequent trips to court to press for repayment. King Matthias knew that if he could convict Elizabeth of a capital crime, he would not only wipe out his debt to her, but weaken a rival dynasty. Plainly, the king had ulterior reasons for making up terrible tales about Elizabeth Bathory. Matthias II delegated the job to his highest-ranking envoy, Gyorgy Thurzo. This man happened to be a close friend of Ferenc, who even asked him to look after his widow Elizabeth while on his deathbed. Nonetheless, Thurzo's loyalty to the king outweighed affection for Ferenc. Between March and July 1610, Thurzo's men interviewed 52 witnesses, including 34 servants of the Countess's neighbors. These witnesses told lurid tales of bruised and beaten young women, disrobed and left to die of exposure. However, other than a clerk who saw a girl with badly burned hands, they repeated second-hand stories, which would not hold up in a court then or now. The castle warden, Benedict Baserdi, claimed to know of a secret torture room and heard cries of pain and the sounds of a whip. Yet he never claimed to see any torture. Even doctors testified that they only saw their patients' faces as they treated them in darkened rooms, and the Bathory women wrapped their bodies in dark cloth. There was enough to be suspicious, but not enough to win a conviction. During the investigation, Thurzo wrote to some of Elizabeth's family, asking them for advice. Strikingly, none of Elizabeth's relations seemed to believe she was innocent. Instead, the extended Bathory family members asked Thurzo to have the king punish Elizabeth personally, rather than ruin the family's reputation with a public trial. In August 1610, the Countess appeared at a court in Eisenberg with the mother of one of the dead girls from her finishing school. The bereaved lady testified that her daughter died of natural causes. It did little good, for Thurzo, the king, and the judges present ignored her statement. The Countess also spoke to Thurzo himself. While serving him tea at Cited, she told him the unconvincing story that one of the finishing school girls murdered every single other disappeared woman to possess their jewels. However, by this time the Countess knew she lived on borrowed time. In September 1610, she made her will, which provided for the disposal of her goods and transferred her estates during her lifetime. It bequeathed everything to her 3 surviving children, Anna, Catalin, and Pal. The Countess Elizabeth only kept her wedding dress, which she intended to wear until her last day. Finally, in October 1610, Elizabeth made one last spa trip with her daughter and collected her jewels before hurrying to Cited. No doubt she hoped, by the time anyone moved to arrest her, that snow would make the roads impassable. Elizabeth already corresponded with her cousin Gabor Bathory, the Prince of Transylvania, in the hope he would rescue her if all else failed. In the end, her coterie turned against her, probably because the authorities began torturing them. After enough pain, they became some of the 306 people to testify against Elizabeth Bathory. The Bathory accomplices went on trial in January 1611. Alona, Jo, and Dorca both had their fingers torn off with iron tongs before being tossed alive onto a bonfire. A young man named Fisco, because of his youth, endured the relatively mild punishment of beheading. Some survivors saved Catalin's life by noting that she slipped them food during their captivity, and the court sentenced her to life in prison. Given that the authorities secured Elizabeth's conviction through torture, some historians wonder if they exaggerated or even fabricated the accusations against Elizabeth to end their torment. Elizabeth Bathory, for her part, blamed everything upon her servants and refused to take any responsibility for the disappearances. The court confirmed the death or disappearance of 80 people in Bathory's castle, though storytellers placed the death toll higher than 650 in years to come. Curiously, the nobles who acted as procurers and the Countess's daughter Catelyn never faced judgment for their role in Elizabeth's crimes. Being of noble blood, the court declined to kill Elizabeth herself, but walled her up in the dungeon where she supposedly tortured so many of her victims. Only Thurzo, the man who investigated her, and a local priest could visit her. Unable to see the sun or stars through her walled-up windows, she took to raving, tearing at her hair, and calling upon the authorities to hang her servants. To her dying day, she maintained that she only allowed her servants to carry out these crimes because she feared them. When Thurzo went to see the widow of his old brother-in-arms, she ranted and raved to his face, accusing him of treason. He responded, "You are in the last months of your life. You do not deserve to breathe the air on earth or see the light of the Lord. You shall disappear from this world and never reappear in it again. As the shadows envelop you, may you find time to repent your bestial life." On August 21st, 1614, Elizabeth Bathory complained to a guard that she had cold hands. The guard advised her to sleep in the hopes it would clear up the coldness. Elizabeth Bathory never woke up. At first, the authorities buried her in a local cemetery, but the parishioners refused to have the murderess buried among their dead. So the family moved her remains to the Bathory family crypt. Even today, the Countess is widely believed to have murdered her victims so that she could immerse herself in their blood to preserve her youth and beauty. However, this claim was never made during the trial. The story became part of the Countess's myth over 100 years after her death. In 1729, a Jesuit scholar named Laszlo Tarowski researched what would become the first account of the Bathory case. During his travels around the Countess's former territories, he heard stories from local villagers of a vampire countess who bathed in blood to look beautiful, so he added it to the book and it became part of the Bathory legend. Her remains stayed in the family crypt for more than 350 years. When the authorities reopened her tomb in 1995, they found it empty. So, was Elizabeth Bathory guilty? We don't have enough evidence to prove her innocence or guilt, which is likely why her legend lives on. That wraps things up for this Legendarium series. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.